Britain threatens Europe to renegotiate the Brexit treaty on the Northern Ireland issue, and as a leverage, French fishermen are denied licenses that have been promised. Now Paris is threatening to cut the electricity on the British Channel island of Jersey. The respected political scientist Dominique Moisy called the dispute between Great Britain and France a childish squabble. Spurred on by the wide-legged actions of Prime Minister Johnson and President Macron, whom Moisy describes as a political alpha animals with a strong tendency towards provocation and confrontation, Europe is devoting itself to a petty dispute. And that in a global political situation that urgently calls for more cooperation because the US versus China conflict threatens to leave the old continent behind. The man has to be able to judge it. The French intellectual Moisy, son of an Auschwitz survivor, researches and teaches at King's College in London. In the old dispute over the Northern Ireland Protocol, Brussels had recently approached London and offered to restrict checks on goods and all medical devices on the border of the northern part of the Irish island. 80% of the goods checks should be eliminated and the customs formalities reduced by 50%. This means that the test would be eliminated for a wide range of retail products, that is, for everything that can be found on supermarket shelves, including Cumberland sausages, said a senior representative of the EU Commission. The proposals are a sincere answer to concerns in Northern Ireland. Nevertheless, Great Britain is adamant and threatens to suspend the agreed customs regulations. David Frost, who personally negotiated the agreement and it was signed by Boris Johnson, is calling for a fundamental renegotiation because the previous text was drawn up in extreme haste at a time of great uncertainty. Well, you really have to let that melt in your mouth for a second. The impression arises that Downing Street regards any kind of concession as a sign of weakness, which is then followed by further demands. In any case, on behalf of his boss, Frost warns of the historical misjudgment that the protocol can no longer be improved. London is ready to trigger the clause to completely repeal the agreement. First of all, London refuses to issue promised fishing licenses to French fishermen. The peak season for scallops is just beginning for them. They are traditionally fished off Jersey and Guernsey. Although the Channel Islands are only 20 kilometers off the coast of Normandy and over 150 kilometers from England, they are autonomous crown property and are therefore subject to British law and British administration. From an economic point of view, it is about change, but politically it is about principle. France's Secretary of State for Europe, Clément Beaune, announced that if Great Britain should not immediately issue the promised licenses, Paris would see this as a breach of contract and, in return, cut off the island's power supply. And that might be even the next weekend. In the background, only with great difficulty concealed, there are French thirst for revenge for the secretly threaded AUKUS agreement, the US's multi-billion-dollar submarine deal with Great Britain and Australia, which nullified a previous agreement with France. The anger about it sits deep in Paris because it actually about a lot of money besides trust and power. Both governments should really be ashamed of themselves. In London, Boris Johnson tries to hide from his own citizens his own responsibility for empty shelves and petrol stations, and in Paris, Macron thinks he wants to blackmail a mini Putin with energy cuts. Both are equally just embarrassing. No, or even worse. In a geopolitical situation in which China is arming itself militarily and strategically and exerting greater pressure on Taiwan every day, in which the USA is clearly partially decoupling from Europe while simultaneously turning to the Pacific region. In such a situation, both would be good advised to put petty differences aside, especially since the questions are of secondary importance, as is so often the case when the principle has to be applied, or in this case, Boris Johnson's tried to grab his power for a longer time. There was already a British Prime Minister who was dubbed the poodle of the USA, because he overlooked the fact that the similarities across the Channel are much greater than those across the Atlantic. And France, like the other EU states, should bear in mind that unnecessary intra-European disputes ultimately only serve the interests of Beijing and Moscow. The fact that the current conflict is being carried out between the so-called two most traditionally arrogant countries of Europe should ultimately be a solvable problem. All the more when Johnson and Macron consider that their respective oath of office also includes being committed to the welfare of their own people. But with Macron, there might be hope, but in the case of Johnson, he forgot that one a long time ago, even before he was prime minister. So I have no big hopes for that thing to change at all. But there are bigger fish to fry, seriously. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.